June 25th, 1876, the Montana Plains. Dozens of U.S. cavalry units riding across grassland led by one of America's most famous military officers, a man whose face was known across the nation, a man celebrated for his bravery, his victory. By the next morning, he and more than 200 of his men will be dead. For generations, the story was simple. It was called Custer's Last Stand. Paintings depicted heroic soldiers fighting to the last bullet. Surrounded, outnumbered, but fighting with honor, fighting with courage, making a final doomed stand against overwhelming odds. It's a powerful image, a tragic legend, an American story of heroism in the face of impossible odds. But the reality was far more complicated. I'm Keith Conrad, and this is Sidequests. Today, the Battle of the Little Bighorn, the most famous battle of the Indian Wars. A disaster that shocked America during its centennial celebration. A victory that marked the high-water mark of Native resistance. And a myth that tells us more about what Americans wanted to believe about themselves than what actually happened. To understand the Little Bighorn, you have to understand what led to it. The 1868 Treaty of Fort Laramie. The U.S. government and the Lakota Sioux made an agreement. The Black Hills, sacred land to the Lakota, rich in resources, would belong to the Lakota. Protected, guaranteed, off-limits to American settlers. That was the deal. That was the treaty. That was the promise. But in 1874, gold was discovered in the Black Hills. Thousands of miners descended on the region. Illegal prospectors, claim jumpers, fortune seekers, all violating the treaty, all ignoring the guarantee, all invading land that belonged to the Lakota by treaty. The U.S. government faced a choice: enforce the treaty or let miners exploit the gold. They chose the gold. Instead of removing the miners, the government tried to buy the Black Hills from the Lakota, offered payment. The Lakota refused. The sacred land wasn't for sale. So the government changed tactics, issued an ultimatum. All Native bands must move on to reservations, must give up the nomadic life, must live where the government designated, must surrender autonomy, must surrender the traditional way of life. Many refused, including Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, two of the greatest leaders of the Plains tribes, so the army was sent to force compliance, to round up the hostile tribes, to bring them under government control. In spring 1876, the U.S. military launched a campaign. Multiple columns of soldiers moving across the plains. The goal: find the Native bands, force them onto reservations, end the resistance. It seemed inevitable that the army would prevail. The U.S. military was professional, equipped, organized. The Native bands were outnumbered in the context of the entire continent, though not in the coming battle. What the army didn't know was that the Native bands had gathered in unprecedented numbers. A massive encampment, thousands of people, hundreds of warriors, the largest gathering of Plains tribes in years. To understand what happened, you have to understand the man who led the 7th Cavalry Regiment. George Armstrong Custer, America's golden boy. During the Civil War, he was a cavalry commander, young, aggressive, ambitious. He made a name for himself through bold tactics, daring charges, rapid movements. When the war ended, he was famous, a national celebrity. Wrote books about his experiences, lectured, posed for photographs, appeared in newspapers, a romantic figure, a dashing cavalry officer. He wanted to be president. Some people thought he should be a hero of the war, young, charismatic. Why not the White House? But he had a complicated reputation. Reckless, willing to take risks that others thought were excessive. Officers who worked with him respected his boldness but doubted his judgment. He made enemies through his arrogance, his contempt for those he considered inferior. He also had controversies, accusations of drinking, accusations of fraternization with Native women, various scandals. Nothing that destroyed his career. He remained in the army, but enough to tarnish his image. By 1876, at age 36, he was looking for redemption, wanting another great victory, something that would restore his reputation, something that would remind America why he was a hero. The Indian Wars offered that opportunity. Fame, glory, a chance to be relevant again. He volunteered to lead the 7th Cavalry in the campaign against the hostile tribes, eager to fight, eager to win, eager to restore his legend. What Custer didn't fully appreciate was the scale of what he was facing. The native bands had gathered along the Little Bighorn River, Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, Arapaho, thousands of people, families, elders, women, children, and warriors, hundreds of them, perhaps 1,000. Exact numbers are debated. Led by Sitting Bull, the spiritual leader, the medicine man, the visionary who had prophesied this gathering, and Crazy Horse, the war leader, the tactical genius, the warrior whose name alone struck fear into American soldiers, and Gall, another powerful leader, a military strategist. These men commanded the respect of their warriors, had earned their leadership through courage and skill and judgment. Custer's scouts reported the numbers, warned him that the village was enormous, that the warrior force was larger than expected, that this wasn't a small band of hostiles, but a massive concentration of native power. Custer's response is debated by historians. Did he underestimate the numbers? Did he believe his own hype? That the 7th Cavalry could defeat any number of native warriors? Did he fear the village would scatter and escape if he waited for reinforcements? Whatever his reasoning, he decided to attack immediately, with the troops he had, without waiting for additional cavalry, without artillery support, without scout support. He believed speed was more important than caution. Attack before they can escape. Strike before they can organize resistance. June 25th, 1876, morning. Custer divided the 7th Cavalry into separate battalions, a tactical decision that would prove catastrophic. Major Marcus Reno attacked the southern end of the village with about 170 men, expecting to hit camp followers, expecting to scatter the village. Instead, he encountered massive resistance. Warriors poured out, organized and deadly. Reno's cavalry was forced to retreat, scrambled back across the river, took defensive positions, began taking heavy casualties. Meanwhile, Custer led the main force northward. About 200 men. His plan: cut off the village's northern escape route, prevent warriors from fleeing, box them in between his position and Reno's. But that's when he discovered the full scope of what he was facing. The village was massive. The warrior force was enormous, and they were already organizing to attack his position. Custer and his immediate command, roughly 200 men, became isolated, surrounded by hundreds of warriors. Tactical situation reversed. The hunter had become the hunted. What happened next is both well-documented and mysterious. Well-documented because there are multiple eyewitnesses from Reno's position describing what they saw happening at Custer's position from a distance. Mysterious because there are no surviving eyewitnesses from Custer's immediate command. Every man under Custer's direct control was killed. So the exact sequence of events, the details of how the battle unfolded, comes from native accounts, from archaeological evidence, from inference, from what historians can piece together. Custer's position became increasingly desperate. Warriors attacked from multiple sides. The 7th Cavalry was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, caught in terrain that didn't favor cavalry tactics. The battle probably lasted less than an hour. Maybe 30 to 45 minutes from when heavy fighting began to when it ended. Custer's force didn't hold a unified last stand. Instead, they fragmented. Different groups of soldiers tried to hold different positions. Resistance broke down in stages. Men were killed in small groups, scattered across the ridge where they'd taken position. Custer himself was killed, along with every officer with him, along with every enlisted man in his immediate command. Final tally: 268 soldiers and scouts killed, 56 wounded, complete annihilation of Custer's immediate command, the most devastating defeat inflicted on the U.S. Army by Plains tribes, one of the worst defeats in American military history. For the native nations involved, the Battle of the Little Bighorn was a stunning victory. They had faced the U.S. Army, faced professional soldiers, faced superior weaponry, and they had won decisively, driven them from the field, killed their commander, destroyed a cavalry regiment. It was the high water mark of native military resistance. The moment when the Plains tribes demonstrated they could still challenge American military might. For days, the victory seemed complete. The village remained unmolested. The warriors had defended their families. The soldiers were defeated. But the victory contained the seeds of tragic irony. News of the defeat reached the East Coast in early July. During America's centennial celebration, the nation's 100th birthday, Americans learned that the Army had suffered a humiliating defeat. Public reaction was outrage, shock, demands for vengeance, calls for stronger military action. Congress responded, appropriated more resources, sent additional troops, committed greater military force to the campaign. Within a few years, the situation had completely reversed. Sitting Bull fled to Canada. The Lakota reservation shrank. The Black Hills were seized. Reservation confinement expanded. The nomadic way of life became impossible. The great gathering that had seemed so powerful in June 1876, by 1877, 1878, it was dispersed. The warriors had surrendered or scattered. The families were confined to reservations. The victory at Little Bighorn was real and significant, but it triggered a response that ended the era of Plains Native independence. That forced the surrender of the Black Hills. That confined hundreds of thousands of people to reservations. The irony is crushing. The greatest military victory achieved the opposite of what the warriors fought for. But there's another layer to this story. How the battle was told. How it became legend. In the days and weeks after the battle, newspapers carried the story. Custer's last stand. The heroic cavalry officer surrounded, fighting to the last man. The narrative became doomed heroes making a last stand. American soldiers outnumbered, refusing to surrender. Fighting until the last bullet, maintaining discipline, maintaining courage, dying gloriously. It's a powerful narrative. It resonates. Americans love stories of heroic defeat, of noble sacrifice, of soldiers facing impossible odds and fighting anyway. Custer became a martyr, a tragic figure, a man who died for his country, a war hero, celebrated, memorialized, honored. But modern historians have a different reading of the battle. Custer wasn't a tragic hero. He was an arrogant commander who ignored intelligence, who divided his forces against the advice of his scouts, who attacked without proper reconnaissance, who allowed his ambition and desire for glory to override tactical judgment. The native leaders, Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, Gall, demonstrated superior tactical skills. They recognized the threat, organized the defense, coordinated the attack, defeated a professional military force through superior strategy and execution. The soldiers who died under Custer's command weren't the heroes of the legend. They were victims of their commander's reckless decisions. Men who died not because they were fighting bravely, but because they were led by a commander who made catastrophic mistakes. The last stand narrative simplifies and romanticizes what was actually a military debacle caused by poor leadership, and the native victory, which the myth obscures, was a remarkable military achievement. Thousands of warriors from different tribes unified under common leadership, executing a coordinated defense against a professional military force. The myth turned a native victory into an American tragedy, turned poor leadership into heroic sacrifice, obscured the real story under layers of romanticism and nationalism. But understanding the reality of the Little Bighorn means holding multiple perspectives simultaneously. For many Americans, Custer is a tragic figure, a soldier who died in battle, a man whose ambition exceeded his judgment, but who faced his end with whatever courage he could muster. There's something to that narrative. For many Native Americans, Custer represents the invasion itself. The broken treaties, the theft of sacred land, the forced confinement. He's not just a defeated general, he's a symbol of American aggression and appropriation. The battle itself was a genuine military victory. The Native warriors displayed remarkable courage and tactical skill. That victory deserves to be celebrated and honored within Native communities. But it was also a temporary victory, a brief moment when the outcome seemed uncertain. Before the vast resources of the American military was fully committed, before the overwhelming force of American expansion became inescapable. So the Little Bighorn is simultaneously a Native triumph and a prelude to Native defeat, a moment when the outcome seemed possible, before history rolled forward and made that outcome increasingly unlikely. The myth of Custer's last stand was created to make Americans feel better about a defeat, to turn a military failure into a heroic narrative, to celebrate the nation even in the face of setback. But the real story, the complex, tragic, ironic story of the Little Bighorn, tells us more about leadership and folly, about courage and strategy, about the clash between expanding empires and resistant peoples, about how victories can contain the seeds of future defeats. The Battle of the Little Bighorn remains one of the most studied battles in American history. It symbolizes the expansion of the United States westward. It symbolizes the resistance of native peoples. It symbolizes the collision between two worlds, two ways of life, two visions of how the continent should be organized. Custer went looking for a decisive victory, wanted to restore his reputation, wanted to be a hero. Instead, he led his command into one of the worst defeats in Army history. And in his defeat, in the native victory, the end of an era was foreshadowed. Within a few years, the Great Gathering would be dispersed, the warriors would surrender, the Black Hills would be taken, the nomadic way of life would become impossible, the reservations would expand and confine. The victory didn't save the native nations, couldn't prevent what was coming, but it stands as testimony to their courage, their skill, their willingness to fight for their land and their way of life. And Custer, he became a legend, not for his judgment, not for his tactical skill, but for his defeat, for his death, for the dramatic end of his ambitions. The myth made him a hero. The reality made him a cautionary tale. Perhaps that's the most fitting legacy, a reminder that ambition without judgment, courage without wisdom leads not to glory but to disaster for everyone involved.